Have you ever wondered if the greatest military mind in European history could be defeated by a bunch of fluffy, long-eared vegetarians? Actually, in 1807, the man who brought empires to their knees was forced into a humiliating retreat by a literal army of bunnies. The year was 1807, and Napoleon Bonaparte was feeling himself. He had just signed the Treaties of Tilsit, effectively ending his war with the Russian Empire and leaving him as the undisputed boss of the European continent. To celebrate not being shot at for 5 minutes, he decided to host a massive rabbit hunt for his top officers. He tasked his chief of staff, Alexandre Berthier, with organizing the event. Berthier, a man who was great at logistics but clearly possessed the animal intuition of a brick, decided that instead of catching wild rabbits, he would just buy a few thousand domesticated ones from local farmers. It was the ultimate work smarter, not harder move that was about to backfire in the most adorable way possible.
Berthier definitely skipped biology class.
On the day of the hunt, Napoleon and his elite entourage arrived at a grassy field, ready to engage in some aristocratic animal cruelty. The rabbits, around 3,000 of them, were kept in cages along the edges of the clearing. When the signal was given and the cages were opened, the expectation was that the rabbits would bolt for the woods in terror, giving the emperor some easy target practice. Instead, these rabbits had spent their entire lives being fed by humans. To them, a man in a fancy hat didn't represent a conqueror of worlds. He represented a giant, walking carrot. Instead of running away, the entire fluffy horde turned and charged directly at the most powerful man in Europe.
The fluff hits the fan.
Napoleon initially laughed it off, thinking the rabbits were just confused. But the laughter stopped when the first wave hit his boots. These weren't wild, skittish hares. These were hungry, domesticated units who were conditioned to expect snacks. They began climbing up the emperor's legs, nipping at his gold-trimmed coat, and generally treating him like a head of lettuce. Napoleon's guards tried to beat them back with sticks and whips, but there were simply too many. It was a sea of white fur and twitching noses, and it was moving with a level of tactical coordination that would have made the Prussian army jealous.
Death by 1,000 boops.
The situation escalated from funny to genuine safety hazard remarkably fast. Napoleon, a man who had stood his ground against charging cavalry and heavy artillery, realized he was losing the battle of the bunny field. He began to retreat toward his carriage, but the rabbits were ahead of him. According to legend, the rabbit army split into 2 wings, flanking the emperor and cutting off his path to the vehicle. It was a pincer movement so perfect that some of the officers present probably wondered if the rabbits had been reading Napoleon's own military manuals. The man who conquered Italy was currently being outmaneuvered by creatures that poop in little circles.
Art of War, Fluffy Edition.
Napoleon finally made a break for it and scrambled into his carriage. You'd think the glass and wood of a royal transport would be enough to end the nightmare, but the rabbits weren't done. As the carriage began to pull away, some of the more ambitious bunnies actually jumped onto the moving vehicle, clinging to the doors and windows like a scene from a low-budget horror movie. They were literally throwing themselves at the windows to get to the man they thought had the kale. Napoleon was reportedly seen throwing rabbits out of the carriage windows as his driver whipped the horses into a gallop to escape the fluffy apocalypse.
Worst Uber ride in France.
The fallout from the rabbit war was mostly psychological damage and a lot of ruined silk. Napoleon never really spoke of the incident again, probably because "I got bullied by a bunny" doesn't look great on a resume when you're trying to dominate the globe. It serves as a hilarious reminder that nature doesn't care about your titles or your grand strategies. You can have the Grand Armée at your back, but if 3,000 hungry pets think you have a snack in your pocket, you are nothing but a glorified food dispenser.
Napoleon, 0. Cinnabon, 1.
The irony is that Berthier's attempt to make the hunt easier is exactly what caused the disaster. If he had used wild rabbits, they would have vanished into the brush in seconds. By choosing domesticated ones, he accidentally weaponized the bunny's lack of fear. It's a classic case of human arrogance meeting animal conditioning. The emperor's chief of staff had inadvertently created the first biological warfare unit composed entirely of things you'd find in a petting zoo.
Task failed successfully, Berthier.
While this wasn't a war in the sense of borders changing or treaties being signed, it remains one of the most cited bruh moments in military history. It's the kind of story that keeps history nerds alive because it humanizes these larger-than-life figures. We like to think of Napoleon as a brooding genius in a long coat, but for one afternoon in 1807, he was just a guy screaming and swatting away a pile of bunnies while his subordinates tried not to record it in the official logs.
Cancel the Emperor subscription.
The Great Rabbit Charge also highlights the absolute absurdity of the Napoleonic era. These guys were living in a world of high-stakes diplomacy and brutal combat, yet they still found time to accidentally get besieged by livestock. It's a stark contrast to the Battle of Austerlitz or Waterloo. One involves brilliant maneuvers and thousands of casualties. The other involves a man who would later be exiled to an island, getting defeated by something that eats its own bedding.
Waterloo. More like water bun.
Ultimately, the rabbits won because they had a clearer objective than Napoleon did. He wanted a symbolic display of power. They just wanted a snack. In the world of motivation, hunger beats ego every single time. The bunnies didn't care about the Napoleonic Code or the continental system. They cared about the potential for a nibble. It's a humbling lesson for any world leader. Always check what kind of army you're releasing before you open the cages.
Carrots over cannons, honestly.
The story has survived through the memoirs of Napoleon's staff, who clearly found the sight of their fearless leader fleeing from fluff too good not to write down. It's a reminder that no matter how much power you have, you're never too big to be embarrassed by a small mammal. Napoleon might have rewritten the laws of Europe, but he couldn't rewrite the laws of a hungry rabbit's stomach.
Nature's ultimate get wrecked.
Today we look back at the Rabbit War as a peak example of historical slapstick. It doesn't change the map, but it definitely changes how we look at the guy on the white horse. If you ever feel overwhelmed by your responsibilities, just remember that the most powerful man of the 19th century once had to retreat from a field because of too many bunnies. You're doing fine.
Absolute that hair-raising experience, Napoleon.
If you enjoyed this absurd chapter of human history, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the top left video to explore another unbelievable historical failure. We'll see you in the next disaster. Thanks for watching.